In the summer of 2017, the Trump administration quietly began a controversial program.
There were hundreds and hundreds of little children who had been taken from their parents. While everyone's waiting to see whether they're going to enact a policy, they were doing it anyway.
1 year later, it shocked the world.
How can you not condemn that?
I've seen a lot of terrible things in my 34 years. Well, we have to address the border.
Under pressure, the president reversed course.
We're going to keep families together, but...
Tonight on Frontline, correspondent Martin Smith with an investigation that reaches from Central America to Washington, D.C. The policy decisions through 2 presidencies.
There's no pleasing any side. I think on the right, your enforcement is never strong enough. And on the left, you're never being humanitarian enough.
And the impact on children and families.
There's a very high likelihood a lot of these parents are never going to see their kids again.
Tonight, separated. Children at the border.
The border spans over 1,900 miles. Nearly 700 of them have a wall or a fence. Where there are gaps, aerostat blimps surveil from above. Since 9/11, security is up. The number of Border Patrol agents has doubled to some 20,000.
These 2 are probably the guides for a larger group. Might have come up north, but then went south.
In mid-June, a young woman and her son from El Salvador took a raft across the Rio Grande into southern Texas.
That one was pretty young.
Yeah, but they've been trying all day.
After several hours of wandering in the hot sun looking for help, they found some Border Patrol agents and asked for asylum. After 24 hours in a holding cell, they were released. I met them at this shelter in McAllen, Texas. Maritza Amaya and her 9-month-old son, Wilfredo.
¿De dónde viene?
Del Salvador.
Salvador.
They crossed the border at a time when many families were being separated.
So tell us your story about why you came at this time.
Pues porque hace 4 años mataron a un hermano mío, los delincuentes, y pues ahora andan buscándome a mí y a mi hijo para matarnos. Nos amenazaban diariamente siempre iban a mi trabajo a buscarme, a decirme de que me iba a pasar lo mismo que mi hermano.
Were you aware of the risks of being separated from your child when you came?
No.
The day I met Maritza happened to be the same day President Trump issued his executive order halting more separations. Families would be allowed to remain together while their asylum claims were considered.
And so what is this? Is it uncomfortable?
Sí, mucho, la verdad me duele.
In the meantime, Maritza wears an ankle bracelet that allows the government to track her movements.
Are you scared now, being here?
¿Tienes miedo ahora? Sí. Pues porque no quiero que me regresen a mi país.
This shelter was founded in 2014 by Sister Norma Pimentel. I asked her about the impact of Trump's separation policy on the families she had seen at her shelter.
They're concerned, they're worried. Sister, what's happening to the children? They saw other parents' children taken away from them, and they would be praying, please, not my child. Please, God, don't let them take my child.
The president says that the people that are coming in can be criminals, they can be very bad people. Is that your experience?
I believe that just because you're an immigrant doesn't automatically make you a criminal. Immigrants must be taken care of as immigrants, families who are fleeing violence, who need protection, and we need to understand the reason why they're here.
The dilemma is that if you're weak, if you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma. We're keeping families together, but we have to keep our borders strong. We will be overrun with crime and with people that should not be in our country.
Later that night, Maritza and Wilfredo waited for a bus to take them on a 2-day journey to be reunited with a brother living in Virginia. On the evening news, the signing of Trump's executive order.
This has been going on for 60 years. 60 years, nobody's taken care of it. Nobody's had the political courage to take care of it, but we're going to take care of it. So we're keeping families together. At the same time, it continues to be zero tolerance for people that enter our country illegally.
While Maritza and Wilfredo may still be denied asylum, they are still together.
Thank you very much.
More than 2,000 other families were not. A few days later, I traveled to El Salvador, Central America, to visit a father who had been separated from his 6-year-old child after crossing into the U.S. illegally. I found him, Arnovis Guidos Portillo, in a tiny village 3 hours outside the capital. It had been 1 month since he'd seen his daughter, Maybelline. He was calling a shelter in Arizona where she was being held.
Hola, ¿se encuentra Maybelline? Sí, soy papá de Maybelline. Ah, okay.
What would you like to say to her right now?
Primeramente que me perdone por verme separado de ella, aunque no fue de mi gusto que los hayamos separados, pero que cuando mi hija me pregunte, papi, ¿por qué te fuiste de mí? O cuando me pregunte, papi, ¿por qué te viniste vos primero y me dejaste sufriendo allá? Entonces, no sé qué voy a responder. Sí, esta es mi casa.
Arnovis gave me a tour of his one-room home.
Esta es casa de Maybelline, aquí era donde dormía. Era su vestido favorito.
Su ropa.
También hay sus juguetes, ¿no? No había grandes juguetes, pero era todo lo que tenía para jugar. Entonces ella tenía una imaginación muy grande.
Do you have pictures of her?
Sí, tengo fotos de mi hija. Aquí están las fotos de mi hija. Es algo difícil ver las fotos de mi hija y darme cuenta que no está conmigo. mi amor.
Like Maritza, Arnovis and his daughter left, fleeing violence.
Entonces sabía que ya no podía seguir aquí, porque corría peligro mi persona y también mi hija.
Arnovis says he got death threats after getting into an argument with the brother of a local gang leader.
Fui amenazado nomás porque, solo por un fútbol nomás, por una mala jugada, ¿no? Algo significante, pero de algo significante se hizo la peor pesadilla de mi vida, ¿no?
The journey north can be torturous. Those from the humblest origins have to navigate many miles on foot.
You run the gauntlet of risks to come here. Traveling for migrants is certainly not safe, and you can subject to horrendous crimes on your journey and be kidnapped and raped, and in certain cases killed.
Their first goal is to reach Mexico, and then the Beast, a freight train that has carried hundreds of thousands of migrants up to the U.S. border. It's a challenge simply getting on board. Sonia Nazario has ridden the train.
Central Americans are crossing Mexico illegally, so they can't get on at the train station. They have to do this as the train is moving. And for a lot of the kids, I would see that the first rung of the ladder would be at their waist or even higher. So children would lose legs and arms and be killed by these freight trains trying to get on and off them. There were beautiful moments on the train where, everyone's singing to try to stay awake, and we would be in a cloud of a million fireflies, these mystical moments. And for a lot of children, it is also an adventure. That's what they view it as until the first horrible thing happens. They had gangsters who controlled the train tops, who would roam from car to car and surround these people and say, your money or your life, throw people off of these trains to the churning wheels below. It's incredible what these people would go through to try to get through the United States.
Many migrants never make it to America. Along the tracks, immigration police often find only discarded clothing.
Ya que en este lado de las vías del tren es donde se cometen asaltos, violaciones a migrantes que pasan acá. Este es un paso migratorio prácticamente.
According to human rights groups, 6 out of every 10 women traveling the route report being raped. And many get birth control injections before setting out on their journey.
I was astonished by the number of people I found crossing through Mexico, trying to get to the U.S. who had faced some kind of kidnapping or some kind of extortion or some other kind of violence. The people who made it here, it self-selects for people who have a tremendous amount of resilience, a tremendous amount of courage, a tremendous amount of just physical strength to get across.
Arnovas and Maybelline avoided the beast. Instead, Arnovas paid a smuggler, or coyote, to help him and Maybelline. Arnovas said the hardest part was when their coyote packed them in a trailer.
Entonces íbamos muy apretados unos encima de otros, ahí iba sufriendo mucho. Ahí empezó una desesperación porque hay muchos casos que las personas se mueren adentro y todo.
He says they spent 52 hours crammed inside the truck with only an apple and a cracker and nowhere to go to the bathroom. When they finally reached the U.S. border, they were elated. It was May 26th, 2018. Before crossing the Rio Grande, they paused for a snapshot. After crossing, they were hoping to join Arnovas' brother in Kansas.
Did you know that you faced possible separation when you came across the border?
No sabía nada de eso. Si eso hubiera sabido, nunca, no me hubiera ido.
Arnovas and Maybelline surrendered to Border Patrol and were taken to a processing center in McAllen, Texas. But 24 hours after they arrived, they were separated.
Entonces me dijeron que ella iba a ser llevada a otro lugar y que yo no iba a poder viajar con ella porque en el autobús ya no había un espacio para mí. Y no sucedió, me doy cuenta que fue una mentira, solo por separarme de ella.
The last time Central Americans fleeing violence made big news was during the Obama administration. In El Salvador, rival gangs MS-13 and 18th Street were at war with each other and the police. Bodies showed up every day. The violence spread to neighboring Honduras and Guatemala. During Obama's first term, many of those fleeing the violence were young people traveling without their parents. And the numbers were steadily increasing.
The government releasing stark new numbers from the crisis on our southern border.
Then, in 2014, there was an unprecedented surge of minors and young families.
Border Patrol says more than 55,000 unaccompanied children have been detained since October. That is up 500%.
U.S. officials were totally taken by surprise.
People from Central America, unaccompanied children as well as adults with children, tend to come in the spring. And then, so there's a sort of bump in the number of people that comes, that tends to decline in the super hot months.
Unaccompanied minors making their way from Central America.
2014 was an exception in that the usual bump that we were expecting, and I say we because I was serving in the administration at the time, was a hockey stick. The number of unaccompanied kids in particular spiked dramatically.
El menor de edad que venga sin mamá o sin papá, se levante las manos. Unaccompanied juvies by themselves. The violence over there doesn't allow us to go to school. That's why we're coming over here.
The U.S. seemed to be caught unaware that there were these push factors in Central America and that there was this surge that was developing of these children. You know, if your house is on fire, you are going to find a way to get out. And these children were finding a way to get out.
When I took office, I committed to fixing this broken immigration
system. Then President Obama asked Amy Pope to help coordinate the White House response.
We started to hear from Customs and Border Protection that they were starting to see an uptick of children coming through. It was clear that it was a pretty significant difference from what we'd seen in the past.
Pictures show hundreds upon hundreds of children packed like sardines.
When pictures surfaced in the media, there was a national outcry.
That 80% of the children had inadequate food and water.
They were very compelling pictures. It was hard to believe that this was happening at the U.S. border.
A tidal wave of unaccompanied alien children.
And they reinforced this perception that our border was being flooded.
As we speak, there are enough Republicans and Democrats in the House to pass an immigration bill.
For the administration, the timing was terrible.
Some in the House Republican caucus are using the situation with unaccompanied children as their newest excuse to do nothing.
President Obama was, at the time, pursuing major immigration reform. But his decision to give temporary protection to undocumented children raised in the U.S. was blamed for sending the wrong message.
The president's own programs, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, word's getting back home. If you come to the United States and you're a child, you just tell them you want to come in and they're going to let you in.
We're seeing a humanitarian disaster, one of the administration's own making.
Vice President Biden's advisor was Juan Gonzalez. You were trying to push through immigration reform. Then you get 60,000 unaccompanied minors coming across the border. What was going on inside the administration?
Well, I think I would say there was a general concern that the flow of migrants to the southwest border would eliminate any opportunity to actually advance meaningful immigration reform in the United States. What Republicans had actually been asking the White House to do was to be stronger on immigration enforcement. There's no pleasing any side. I think on the right, your enforcement is never strong enough. And on the left, you're never being humanitarian enough.
Yeah, we're on my property right now. That fence right there is my neighbor.
As the numbers of migrants increased, so did anti-immigrant sentiment.
250.
Last year, we met Mike Vickers, a local veterinarian in Brooks County, Texas, right on the border with Mexico.
We need to go through this gate.
He blamed Obama's immigration proposals for luring thousands of young migrants to America.
The Obama administration hurt us when he declared that if they have a family member here, he was going to allow them to stay. I mean, it was like 24 hours later, here they come. I've got pictures of the huge groups of these teenagers pouring across, intercepting them out here. Huge groups of them coming through.
In order to prevent migrants from coming onto his land, Vickers had set up an electric fence.
There's two wires on the top, one on the inside and one on the outside. It's 220 volts, but it's amped down so it won't kill anybody. So if somebody touches it, it's going to roll their eyes back a little bit. They're going to think twice about trying to climb over the fence. Consequently, they dig under or they cut holes underneath it. We're constantly plugging up these holes or patching the areas that they cut.
Vickers runs a local militia that helps Border Patrol track down undocumented migrants.
This guy's another body. We find a lot of these.
He shared his laminated pictures of dead migrants found on his ranch.
One of the more recent ones. This guy was
Migrants who died of dehydration or hypothermia. 7,000 dead migrants have been found along the border since 2000.
This girl is right by a crawl hole 50 yards from the front gate you drove in. I'm black and white. I'm not gray. Everybody that has come into this country illegally are going to have to face some consequences. The bottom line is as simple as this. They've broken our laws by coming into our country illegally. Whether they're trying to flee violence, flee in a terrible economic situation, I don't care what their circumstances are. We cannot take care of the whole world.
Ok. Pásale para acá. ¿De dónde son?
De Honduras.
¿De Honduras? ¿Es tu hijo?
Sí, es mi hijo.
Okay.
Okay.
U.S. and international law allows anyone, man, woman, or child fleeing violence to seek
La
asylum.
denuncia de la DPI de Honduras, que yo estaba siendo amenazada, pues estaban sacándole dinero a uno, extorsión. Si no paga lo que le piden, lo matan. Son las razones por qué.
Immigration advocates urged President Obama to be more compassionate.
¿Es tu hija? Sí.
We're talking about, 60,000 children who were apprehended by Border Patrol. I mean, those kids wouldn't fill a large football stadium in this country. I believe that we can handle that level of compassion.
The White House pushed back.
The truth is, you can absorb 70,000 kids if it ends at 70,000 kids. The question is that the end of it? The population in Central America is in the millions. We don't have an immigration policy that says if you come here, you get to stay here. It's not clear that if we did have that policy, we would have it for Central Americans and not for other countries around the world. It's not clear that what was happening in Central America is worse than what was happening in Sudan or Syria or anywhere else. We didn't think it was feasible or consistent with what the American public would tolerate to just say, okay, you get here, you're in.
Under pressure from Republicans, the administration ordered several tough measures, including more border agents and accelerated deportations. Immigration advocates called Obama the deporter-in-chief.
Most importantly, we will live up. Most importantly, we will live up. Most importantly, we will live up to our character as a nation.
To deter more immigrants, the Obama administration even considered separating children from their parents when they crossed.
I do remember being struck that that was a pretty extreme proposal and that it wasn't considered for very long because it was a terrible idea.
And what was the idea exactly?
The idea is effectively what the Trump administration has enacted, which is to prosecute everybody who enters illegally, which would necessitate separating kids from their parents. And we didn't consider it for very long because it was on its face a terrible idea.
Who raised an objection to that idea?
It didn't need to be raised. We all kind of looked at each other and said, we're not going to do that, are we? And it was pretty clear we weren't. And that's pretty much as far as it went.
A multi-million-dollar detention center has just opened in Texas.
They rejected separating children from parents, but they did commit to an expanded use of family detention.
In terms of what options might be on the table, detention for families, intact families, seem to be the only place to go.
Just beyond the dusty dirt field sits the largest immigrant family detention center in the United States.
To accommodate the growing backlog of asylum seekers, the president ordered the construction of more detention centers.
How did you feel about the idea of building out the infrastructure to allow you to detain families with children?
I was not excited about family detention, but at the end of the day, the options available to the government are all pretty terrible. We don't have the robust asylum process that we need for this kind of a situation.
Inside family detention, conditions could be harsh.
There's nothing family about it. These are vulnerable asylum-seeking mothers and their children asking for help. And in response, our government transferred them to a detention center where some of them suffer needlessly and are ultimately deported.
Katie Shepard provided pro bono assistance to families detained in a facility in Dilley, Texas.
It looks like a large FEMA camp, high fences all the way around the facility. If you drive up to the detention center in Dilley, from the highway, the center is actually recessed into the ground, so you can't even see the detention center. And at night, all you see are these big lights that really light up the sky. It's a bizarre thing, but it is very much hidden, and Dilley is a tiny little town. It has like 4 gas stations and a few taco stands, and that's it. It's far away from robust legal communities, and that decreases the likelihood that these people are able to get a meaningful day in court.
Family detention remained in place for a year. But then Obama ran squarely into something called the Flores Settlement.
There's a settlement out there called Flores that limits when and how children can be held in detention. We read it as children cannot be held in detention alone under any circumstances. But Flores wasn't clear that it applied to children who were with their parents.
But then immigration advocates sued the government, arguing that Flores should apply to any and all children held in detention, with or without their families. They won.
Late Friday night, a federal judge ruled the detention centers do not meet legal standards.
The current policy of detaining immigrant children and their mothers is unlawful.
The judge ultimately determined that you could not detain children for long periods of time and established a 20-day limit.
President Obama was forced to release families intact pending court hearings. It was near the end of his term.
Thank you. That is some group of people, thousands. So nice. Thank you very much. That's really nice. Thank you.
On the morning of June 16, 2015, Donald Trump announced his run for the presidency.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people.
He invoked fears of a border out of control.
The border is a disaster. People are pouring in, and I mean illegal people, illegal immigrants, and they're pouring in.
Trump had struck election gold.
Illegal immigrants with criminal records are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens.
He would return to the theme time and time again on the campaign trail.
We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
And as president.
And yes, we will build the wall. It will be built.
His first trip to California as president included a look at the 8-wall prototypes.
After taking office, Trump moved quickly.
If you don't have a wall system, we're not going to have a country.
Several deportation arrests in Northern California today.
In his first 100 days in office, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, rounded up 40,000 undocumented immigrants. Trump also broadened the criteria for deportation and threatened to cut funding to sanctuary cities.
Turn off the federal spigot for any city that refuses to cooperate on people in this country illegally.
But some migrants continued to come across.
¿Cómo están? ¿Es tu hijo? Sí. ¿Dónde eres? Okay. Pásale para acá.
The president seemed especially frustrated by the policy of arresting family units and then releasing them pending a court date.
We are going to end catch and release. We catch them? Oh, go ahead. We catch them? Go ahead.
These orders are carried out. They will radically change how immigration is enforced. It orders an end to catch and release.
So the Trump administration began considering something far more draconian: separation of parents and children at the border. The same policy that Obama had rejected.
Are you, the Department of Homeland Security, considering a new initiative that would separate children from their parents if they try to enter the United States illegally?
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that.
We were very concerned about the consideration of a blanket policy of this nature. So we continued to monitor the situation, but we were unable to get confirmation that there was a policy in place from the administration. What we were told repeatedly was that it was being considered, and that they continued to see it as the solution for how to prevent people from coming to our border and asking for asylum.
There's been reports that you are considering separating children from their mothers at the border, and I want to know whether that's true.
Only if the situation...
A month later, at a Senate hearing, Kelly publicly walked back his earlier statement on separations.
If the mother is sick or addicted to drugs or whatever, in the same way we would do it here in the United States if we...
Yeah, so if you thought the child was endangered,
sure.
that's the only circumstance to which you would separate.
Can't imagine doing it otherwise.
Yeah.
But 3 months later, they did just that. The Trump administration quietly began a pilot program at the southern border.
We soon learned that there were hundreds of little children who had been taken from their parents. And so while everyone's waiting to see whether they're going to enact a quote unquote policy, they were doing it anyway.
That summer, we were in Tijuana, Mexico, and spoke to Esmeralda Rodriguez and her 3 daughters, who had sought refuge at this shelter for women and children. They were planning to ask for asylum by entering the country legally at a checkpoint in San Diego. But they had heard rumors that families were either being turned away at the checkpoint or detained and separated.
Le han dicho de que Donald Trump no está dejando pasar, que está quitando los niños a las mamás y así.
¿Y qué vas a hacer si te hacen eso?
Pues no sé qué haría en esos momentos. No sabemos si va a pasar o si nos van a dejar ahí o de verdad nos van a quitar a nuestra mamá.
Sí se compromió la tierra delante de Dios y estaba la tierra llena de violencia. Y miró Dios.
The family had fled El Salvador in November 2016. They say they escaped after the oldest, Allison, witnessed a murder.
Cuando mataron a mi madrina, cuando nos pusieron las pistolas en la cabeza que nos iban a matar si no nos íbamos del país.
¿Cómo haces para sobrevivir esa memoria?
Bueno, mi familia me llevó a un psicólogo para que me pasara.
¿Y sigues pensando en ese momento?
Sí. En la noche me levantaba con miedo porque como soñaba que estaba de nuevo viendo a mi madrina que la estaban matando.
Allison's mother said there was no turning back.
Porque ella no mata. No matan a ella. Yo pues tengo que ver que mis hijas estén bien.
¿Y qué son tus planes?
Yo quisiera pedir asilo en los Estados Unidos con mis hijos. Que primero Dios me lo van a dar. Yo tengo fe en Dios que me lo van a dar.
The practice of separating families was in effect by the fall of 2017, but opposition was muted.
I have put in place a zero tolerance policy
or illegal entry.
It was not until months later that Attorney General Jeff Sessions made the separation policy explicit while on a border visit to San Diego. He said the government had to separate children while their parents were prosecuted for illegal entry.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. And that child may be separated from you as required by law. If you make false statements,
Are you going to be separating families? Is that why you're here?
You're going to jail.
Behind Sessions was the acting director of ICE, Tom Homan.
That's a felony also.
I was honored to stand next to Jeff Sessions to announce this decision. Surrounded by many American heroes wearing green with one heckler that probably doesn't know the first thing about serving this nation.
If you have a heart, if you have a soul, get out of here. Why do you work for this administration?
In order to carry out these important policies,
It's not a new
I
policy.
have sent 35.
DHS has not changed their policy on separating families. What we're saying is if you cross the country illegally between the ports of entry, you're going to be prosecuted. We've done it before. Now we're just going to do zero tolerance. It made it
But we
clear.
hadn't separated families.
We've been separating families for 34 years. I've been doing this job.
Yes, you've been separating families if there's a threat to the welfare of the child. This is a much broader application of this enforcement.
I agree. We do more of it.
This decision to enforce the law much more strictly resulted in the separation of somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 parents from their children. That was new.
I agree.
The Trump administration argued they were forced to do it because under the Flores settlement, children cannot be held for more than 20 days in an adult detention facility. They said they faced a stark choice.
And the choice is binary, to separate the children or instead within 20 days to let the parents and the children go free into society with expectation they show up for court.
The administration has been creating this false dichotomy, this false choice that the only options are separation or family detention, which they say they couldn't do. The reality is that alternatives to detention exist, specifically designed as humane, affordable, and effective options.
Instead of choosing another option, the Trump administration simply separated children and sent them to shelters.
The conditions are more than comfortable for these kids while their parents are being prosecuted for illegal entry. They're keeping them in a protected, safe environment that, frankly, is probably superior to some of the situations you see in our cities and towns.
Jessica Vaughn is the director of policy studies at a Washington-based think tank that advocates strong border enforcement.
Money for these shelters, but they are appropriate for these kids.
Has this been done ever before in American history?
It certainly has been done if it's determined that the parent is a risk to the child.
That's different. That's a child welfare issue. That's to protect the child. That's different. Has there ever been a time in American history where parents were separated from their children by the government forcibly?
Well, certainly in the criminal justice system.
Yes, but that's different. That's for the welfare of the child.
I can't think of another time that I know of when kids have been separated from, the caretaker parent.
In fact, the last time children were separated like this was when the government forcibly separated Native American children from their families. A lot of Americans find it appalling. What do you say to them?
I think it's appalling that we have to do it.
What do you think the consequences are for these children that have gone through, that are still going through this trauma?
I think it's very possible that some of these kids will have some lasting effects.
For 15-year-old Jocelyn Belush, who crossed into Arizona with her mother on June 1st, it was traumatic. They were picked up and initially taken to a cell, which detainees call the icebox.
Nos tomaron las huellas, después nos trajeron para allá, para la hielera, allí. Y de ahí nos quedamos ahí, esperando para ver qué hacían. Y ahí había mucho frío.
Within hours, they were separated. Jocelyn was sent to a Texas shelter. Her mother remained in Arizona.
¿Qué te explicaron? No me dijeron nada. Solo me dijeron que me iban a llevar para un albergue y que nunca jamás iba a volver a ver a mi mamá. Pues ellos no querían separar de mi mamá, pero me separaron y yo me quedé llorando en esa hielera porque no la podía hablar.
For the very young, the experience is likely even more harrowing. Michelle Brane visited children in detention in June.
I observed young children being held in separate cells from their parents, pending processing. In some cases, they were extremely distraught. They had no idea what was going to happen to them. They had not been told.
Brane asked to interview some of the children.
We were given a list by the government, and we were told that we could choose who we wanted to speak to. Looking through the list of over 500 names, I noticed that there were some very young children there, including a 2-year-old, several 1-year-olds, and one child that was listed as being 0. So I asked to see those children. They left and came back and said that they couldn't find the children. They said to me, well, we called out their name and nobody responded, so we don't know where they are. So I sort of said, well,
These are babies.
They're babies. They're babies. Obviously, they're not going to respond to their name being called. Perhaps you need to locate the adult who is in charge of them, who's taking care of these babies. And they had no answer for me. They just shook their head and said, I don't know.
Growing outrage tonight as thousands of children are split from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border.
The battle over the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy on immigration is intensifying.
If the Statue of Liberty could cry, she would be crying today. As I stand here, there are 2,300 babies and kids who were ripped away from their parents by our government and are in detention facilities across America.
Outrage came from both the right and the left.
Many of the criticisms raised in recent days are not fair, not logical, and some are contrary to plain law.
On June 14, Attorney General Sessions responded to criticism by invoking Scripture.
Due to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing.
Later that day, Sarah Huckabee Sanders backed Sessions up.
Say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this, hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen. That's not what I said, and please don't take my words out of context.
Come on, Sarah, you're a parent. Don't you have any empathy for what these people are going through? They have less than you do.
Guys,
Sarah, come on,
settle down.
seriously. It's a serious question. These people have nothing. They come to the border with nothing, and you throw children in cages. You're a parent. You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead.
4 days after that, an audio tape was published by ProPublica. It led the news for days.
When you heard the tape that ProPublica published of the children wailing, what was your reaction?
I didn't hear the tape.
Oh, come on.
I did not hear the tape. I did not hear the tape.
I can't believe that.
I've heard many children cry in my 34 years. I don't need to hear children cry.
Can I play it for you?
Yeah.
It's a young girl who asks to call her aunt. She wants to call her aunt. She has the number memorized. What do you think?
It tugs at the heartstrings for sure.
How can you not condemn that?
Look, I've seen a lot of terrible things in my 34 years. Well, we have to address the border. I mean,
do you not sympathize with their
absolutely.
situation?
I'm a parent. It's sad, but when the government chooses to enforce the law and they separate the parent that's been prosecuted, just like every U.S. citizen person in this country gets separated when he gets arrested, but people want a different set of rules for an illegal alien.
We're signing an executive order. I consider to be a very important executive order. It's about keeping families together.
2 days after the audio tape of the wailing children, the president reversed course.
You're going to have a lot of happy people. Feel very strongly about it. We don't like to see families separated. At the same time, we don't want people coming into our country illegally. This takes care of the problem. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
The president's order stopped future separations, but it said nothing about what would happen with the children already separated. On June 30th, demonstrators in 700 cities and towns across America demanded reunification.
Hey there, everyone. We're headed towards the Department of Justice. Thank you all.
As a result of an ACLU lawsuit, a federal judge in California had ordered the government to reunite all separated children within 1 month. 15-year-old Jocelyn Balouche was released from a children's shelter in Brownsville, Texas on June 30th. 6 days later, her mother Juana was released from a detention center in Eloy, Arizona. Volunteers paid her bond.
Somos conscientes de que venimos a este lugar sin ninguna invitación, pero el castigo, el pago que pagamos es muy fuerte.
She was released with another Guatemalan woman, Amalia, who had been separated from her 2 boys.
Si no tienes paciencia, te caes.
The following days would be full of hotel rooms and car rides, as the 2 were driven across the country to reunite with their children.
Sí, ya vamos. Nos faltan unos días, lo sé, pero vamos. Ya solo son horas. Para mí es una gran emoción. No puedo olvidar. Es un momento fue una adrenalina aquí en mi corazón. Sí. Yo estando en Eloy dije que no quería estar en este país porque estaba encerrado. Ahí en la detención nos hacían sentir que nosotros no teníamos que estar aquí. De que por qué venimos a este país donde nadie nos quiere. Pero ya estando aquí, yo le agradezco a Dios la oportunidad que me dio de estar aquí.
In New York, mother and daughter were reunited after 38 days apart. Juana says her daughter had changed.
En su forma de ser era muy dulce, pero ahorita es un poquito enojada. No era así. Por miedo quizás, no sé. Sí. Ya siento que me cambia mucho. Como que a veces me enojo, no sé. Es por lo que viví, que no lo quiero volver a recordar. Va a ser todo diferente, ¿viste? Te amo, mamá.
Despite a court order, hundreds of children remain separated from their parents. Maritza and Wilfredo, who I saw in the shelter in McAllen, Texas, were met by her brother in Virginia. Maritza now reports to the authorities every 15 days while she waits for her asylum hearing. The Rodriguez family spent 4 weeks in family detention before being released. We have since lost touch with them. Maybelline Guidos was sent back to El Salvador after 33 days in the shelter in Arizona. Her father says she has also changed. Now she is quiet, he says, and cries a lot.
Maybelline no quería hablar. No, ella cuando uno preguntaba solo se quedaba como retrocediendo en su memoria lo que había vivido, pero no, ella no tenía palabras para decir esto pasó, esto pasó.
But the day before we arrived, Maybelline had started to talk about her experiences for the first time.
Me llevaron un avión que me dijeron, y mi papá le dije, ya lo va a alcanzar en el avión, me dijo. Y cuando yo llegué allá y yo le dije, y mi papá ya va a venir, me dijo, y era mentira.
¿Y no te decían dónde estabas tú?
¿No?
¿Y vos les preguntabas?
Sí.
¿Y qué te decían?
Que no sabía dónde estaba.
Te daba miedo.
Sí, y me decían que si lloraba que no me iban a hacer caso. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Ella como que si no me mira un momento dice, papi, ¿dónde está? Y cuando no estoy empieza a preguntar mi papi, ¿dónde está? Que ella quisiera estar todo el tiempo conmigo. A veces si voy con ella a la escuela, a veces me la traigo porque no quiere quedarse. Ajá, es como que ella siente que el tiempo cerca de mí como que se va a terminar, ¿no? Entonces como que tiene el temor que va a volver a pasar lo que pasó antes.
For more on this and other Frontline programs, visit our website at pbs.org/frontline. Frontline's Separated Children at the Border is available on DVD. To order, visit shop.pbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. Frontline is also available for download on iTunes.
Stretching for almost 2,000 miles from coast to coast, through cities, across canyons, through deserts and rivers, the US-Mexico border is as diverse as it is vast. For generations, culture, tradition, and people have crossed this border, many in pursuit of the American dream. But others have also tried to cross.
We are going to get the bad ones out. The criminals and the drug dealers. We are going to get them out, and we're going to get them out fast.
Recently, we've witnessed a new drive to strengthen the border between these two countries. A call to build a wall. But this wall has divided families and divided opinion throughout the world. With over 350 million legal crossings every year, the US-Mexico border is the busiest land border on Earth. Over 750 miles of barrier already exist. Impenetrable steel fences, walls, and barbed wire.